Welcome to the Vrakas Blum Consider Consulting webinar. This week, or this month, I'm sorry, we are going to be featuring FAS, the Sage Fixed Asset Software. And with us, we have Wayne Austin, Sales Engineer 2 of the Sage FAS division. And with that being said, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Wayne and have him introduce himself. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your time today. What I'll be covering today is just going to be a portion of the Sage Fixed Assets solution. Now, our solution for fixed assets management comes in a few modules. There's a depreciation module, which we'll cover today, which is where you will handle all of your fixed asset depreciation. There's also a tracking module for doing physical inventory and reconciliation, as well as a planning module that handles your CIP or construction in progress type needs for assets before they become fixed assets, that once you're ready to be placed in service, you can actually send them directly to the depreciation module to become fixed assets and start depreciation. So I'm actually going to be focusing on the depreciation module for today's webinar. And we will allow some time on the back end of this for questions and answers. So again, thank you for your time today, and I'm going to go ahead and jump directly into the application. Now, this is the newest release of the fixed assets module. We typically do 2 releases per year. One will usually come out in September, October, and then the tax release will usually come out in January once the IRS has finalized any tax rule changes. So you will actually be able to see some of the new features incorporated in this new version. Now, I'd like to just point out a few things in the system administration module. This is where you can make changes to your company settings. For example, if you want to make changes to your fiscal year, if you have short years that's supported, set book overrides, or choose how you want transfers handles within a company. Now, you are able to do transfers within a company by department, location, or whatever you choose, but you can also do transfers between companies of the same type. So in other words, you can transfer from one US type company to another, or from one nonprofit to another, or from a Canadian company to another Canadian company. Reason for that restriction is that they have different depreciation methods and property types, so things would not exactly align if you're going in between the similar types. Now, some of the things you can also do here in system administration where you can back up and restore your company data, which is highly recommended. You can also, if you're in a multi-user environment, limit who can do disposal of assets, for example, transfer assets, set period closes, clear period closes, or even who can access certain reports. So some important functionality if you are in a multi-user environment. So I'm going to just now jump into the main asset list view. All of this, of course, is very customizable. You can choose what information you're seeing in this view quite easily. And of course, you can easily change the sort order. Now, there's some important functionality I want to be able to jump right into in the asset detail screens. Now, all of these general information fields as well are customizable. You can change the display names, create smart lists, for example, with all of your GL account codes, accum accounts, asset accounts. Of course, you can create smart lists with all of your various locations. Now, there's also a notes area here that you can include in the asset detail notes. For example, this particular asset is a delivery vehicle, so I'm actually using my notes field simply to maintain track of when I do my service intervals. You can also attach invoices of the assets. You can attach pictures, invoices, contracts, lease paperwork, basically anything you can scan in PDF format, JPEG, bitmap, or PNG files. This is actually quite handy year-end. If you're going through an audit, you need to get access to all of the documentation for an asset. It's all available in one place. It's also important in filing insurance claims, having proof of exactly what you had and the condition it was in you can actually make that process much smoother for yourself. Now, one of the new features in this particular release, they did an update to the image manager. So you can now drag and drop files. You can upload multiple images at once. You can actually share images with multiple assets. So for example, if you have an invoice that is linked to several assets, you can actually do that here and link it to the individual assets and actually see which assets it's linked to. So very intuitive, very easy to use, and gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. Now, let's talk a little bit about these general information fields. So one of the reasons you'll also want to put some thought into how you customize these fields. On the back end of this, on the reporting side, you're going to be able to sort and subtotal by any of these fields or any of the book information fields. So for example, if you want to be able to run your depreciation expense report and sort and subtotal maybe by location, and below that by asset class, you could easily do that if you've got these fields defined here. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the book fields down below. So in our system, you'll have 7 books available. Your tax, internal, state, AMT, and ACE books. And there's 2 custom books on the end that you can simply rename them to whatever you want and use for other things such as property tax, or if you just needed an additional book for an additional state or some other reason, you can easily customize those. Now, we do keep up to date, as I stated earlier, with the updates on all of the latest changes to the IRS tax rules, and therefore you'll see all of the recognized property types that the IRS recognizes across all the books. We've got more than 50 depreciation methods built in, and you can also, of course, create your own custom depreciation methods, which would then also show up here in the list. So these particular ones here are ones that I created that you can easily create yourself as well. There's support for, of course, the 168 or bonus 179 depreciation. So if your company is taking advantage of those, you can certainly leverage those capabilities. Now, in order for an asset to become a fixed asset that's depreciable, you need to ensure that you populate all of these 5 critical depreciation fields. So property type, place and service date, acquisition value, depreciation method, and estimated life. Now, you can import en masse your assets into the system. So for example, if you're coming from another system or you're currently doing managing your fixed assets in spreadsheets, you can actually import that data from Excel into our system. It'll accept CSV format, tab delimited, the old version of Excel or the new version of Excel. So you'll have no problems with importing. Now you can bring in all of the information you have in your spreadsheet. So for example, if you've previously done some type of impairment, in the past, you've got a beginning year to date, beginning accum info. You can bring that information in as well as part of your import process. So all of the data here, including these critical depreciation fields, your beginning accum, beginning year to date info, are on the input side of this equation. And everything here from your prior through date down that's in blue is all calculated data. So one of the updated features that came out in the October release that came out last month now includes some additional information here. You can now see your prior through date as well as your current depreciation through date and your depreciation this run, which are now visible directly in the asset details. You can also display this information here as well as one of the columns available here. And of course, you can choose which columns of data you're seeing here. So you no longer have to wait until you're actually running a depreciation expense report to see that type of information as far as prior through date and depreciation this run. It's readily available that you can see it immediately in the asset details. Now, you can also run a quick projection across any of the books. So for example, if you want to get a quick look for a new capital asset you just added, as to how is that particular asset going to depreciate out through its remaining life. And you can see that information across any of the books. Now, For an ongoing basis, if you're adding a new asset, one of the helpful things you may want to consider doing is creating templates. And when you create templates in the system here in the depreciation module, those templates are also available to the tracking module as well as the planning modules. And for those of you that are currently Sage 100 or Sage 300 ERP users, those templates are also available there, because you can actually link this module for doing your journal entry posting or for asset creation from the AP or PO side in 100, and in some versions of Sage 300, where you can actually do asset creation from that side and apply the templates you created. Just to give you an example of what that looks like, if you're going to add an asset, for example, that you routinely add and you're doing this manually, you can actually create templates. You can create multiple copies of the same template based on your needs. So if I'm going to add a computer, which is something that'd be common, I've created a template where I've populated the vast majority of the common information. I've also included property types, depreciation methods. So the only thing I would need to do is update my acquisition date, place and service date, give it a value, and actually save it. So quite easy to do. If you've got multiple of these that came in, you can easily create the first one and replicate that particular asset, which is how I created these, so that you don't have to do multiple entry for multiple items that came in. Of course, we support quantities of more than one, so you could certainly do that. But most people are going away from bulking assets together and doing each of its own line item. So this is where adding the first one, telling it to create X number of copies. If I got 10 in, I would do the first one, tell it to create 9 copies, and I've got my 10 computers added quite easily. So those are some of the time savers that you would get to experience. So one of the other things I want to talk about is the flexibility of handling disposals and transfers in the system. So for example, if I wanted to do a quick search, let's say I'm going to do some renovations at one of my offices, and I know I'm going to replace some pieces of furniture equipment. I can do a quick search, for example, and I'm just going to use a criteria. You can use any of the available fields for your search, and I'm just going to keep it vague right now. I'm going to use the description field, and I'm just going to say contains, because I'm not sure exactly what the descriptions may be, but you can do less than, greater than. You can search based on date range, place and service date, things like that. But in this case, for this example, I just want to find all the chairs in the company, because let's say I'm going to replace them all. It could be computer monitors or whatever makes sense. So I would simply do that quick search. I can select all. Now I can do a bulk disposal or bulk transfer of all of the assets of that type. It could be a much larger group. So for example, I could do a search where I'm going to maybe use asset class, which is probably going to be more common, and I'm going to be specific. And you could be looking at a particular type of assets, maybe all of the vehicles you have in the company, you're going to trade them in, or their leases have expired. You can quickly find all and do the same thing. So I'm actually going to use computer equipment in this case here. Oops. I need to actually clear out of my current search and go back to my full list of active assets and do my search. So let's go back to that. We're going to use asset class, and I'm going to be specific again, and I will actually use all of my vehicles in this case. So let's say all of my vehicles, leases have expired. I'm going to do a disposal of them all. I can select all. I can now do bulk disposal. So in the case of doing a bulk disposal like this, one thing I do want to point out, if you're doing a disposal by sale or and there's some expensive sale, cash proceeds, or any of that type of information pertinent to this disposal, what the system will actually do is going to evenly distribute that cash proceeds or expensive sale across all of those assets. Whereas if you're doing an individual disposal, it's actually going to give you some more granular control. So depending on the type of scenario you're using as to how you'll want to be able to handle these disposals. So let me do an example where I'm just going to do a single item disposal. So this is a Dell laptop. So I'm actually going to walk through just the standard disposal process. So in this case, I'm going to, since I've got some net book value remaining, remember I'm using accelerated depreciation in my tax book, but I'm doing straight line in my financial book. And I also do have a difference in value between my tax book, financial book. So you can actually have different acquisition values between the books, and of course, different depreciation methods based on what your needs are. So in this case, I'm going to actually do a full disposal, but just to show you as an example what a partial would look like. If this were, let's say, for example, 10 computers at $1,000 each, and I wanted to get rid of 2 of the 10, I would say yes to doing a partial disposal. I would enter the dollar amount that I'm actually disposing. So since there are 10 computers at $1,000 each, my acquisition value would have been $10,000. So in this case, I'm disposing of 2. So I'd actually enter $2,000 for my disposal amount. And what that would do is reduce my remaining acquisition value to $8,000 and continue depreciation of that particular asset, the remaining asset, based on that $8,000 and the depreciation method you're currently using and the remaining life for that portion of the assets. Okay, so you can do partial or full disposal if you do bulk assets together. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and let's say I'm going to do this by sale. Actually, let's make that $1,500. I'll actually throw in some expense of sale. Let's say I had to ship this computer off to whoever I'm selling it to, and I'm absorbing the shipping expenses. So I want to reflect that. Now, before committing to the disposal, I can actually calculate, and you'll see it'll calculate my gain loss across all of the books. And you can manually enter your gain loss information if for whatever reason, you've got some kind of credit coming or an expense that's not reflected here. You can manually set your gain loss information. Now, you can view the disposal worksheet before committing to the disposal. Okay, so in the case that you are taking advantage of the accelerated depreciation 168 or the bonus 179, if you notice here, that recapture information will also be taken into account. Now, all of the reports are exportable. You can export them out to Crystal Reports, PDF, Excel, a variety of formats, but you don't need to save that one because it actually will be saved in the system. So if I go ahead and say, okay, let me go ahead and commit to doing this disposal, you'll see I'll go back to the main display. Because this is a full disposal, there is actually, everything is grayed out. What that means is that this asset is now fully disposed. Status will change to disposed. If this were a case where I was disposing of 2 of my 10 computers, it would continue to depreciate based on the remaining value of the remaining assets, that 8 out of 10. Okay. Now, it also creates a great audit trail. So you'll notice here, if I go to the History tab, it'll show the asset was disposed, when it was disposed in the system, but it'll also show separately the date of the gain loss calculation. So you can do disposals in the past or future date disposals. So in the case of you doing your disposals, for example, on a quarterly basis, you may be doing September or October disposals today. It'll also show who did the disposal. Now, at year end or for your own purposes, you may need to review your disposal information at any time. You can simply go back to the Transactions tab. You can view that transaction and see exactly what was done. You can also go back and view that disposal worksheet. You can print it out or you can export it and email it off to whoever needs it. Now, we know mistakes happen. Let's say, for example, someone gave you the wrong asset ID number or serial number to dispose of, and for whatever reason, you need to now undo this. You can simply go back to the Transactions tab, and you can limit, by the way, who can do disposals, who can reverse transactions, things like that. And I would simply now select Delete Last Transaction, and everything will now, if you notice, be back to normal, and everything will continue to depreciate as if nothing happened. It completely undoes the transaction. Okay, so if I go to the Transactions tab, you'll see it's all gone. However, if I go to the History tab, you will see that it does not remove that entry. It still shows, hey, this asset was disposed on November 29th, and the gain loss calculation is still there, but it does create a new entry showing you that, hey, that last transaction was reversed on this date, and also will show who did it. Okay. So it's a really great system, and you can set controls as to who can take these types of actions. So I'm going to actually go to another asset because there is something else I definitely want to make sure I bring up. Let's find something that's still active. So one of the things you can do when you're starting the system up, you can have it set to actually give you a quick asset snapshot when you open a company, so you can get a really quick overview of what's going on with the overall picture of assets in any particular company. So you can view this information by book. So if in your particular department or in your role, you are responsible for the tax book as well as your financial or GAAP book, you may want to pay attention to this type of information. So in looking at this, I can easily see, the total net value of all of my assets in the company. I can see, it broken down by the status of those assets, active, disposed, inactive, transferred, and so on. But more importantly, looking in this main area, I can see the in-service by quarter. So if you're in Q4, you're getting close to your year end, and you see that your assets placed in service exceed 40% in Q4, one of the things you would need to be able to do and do very quickly is to be able to do a mid-quarter convention switch. And that's very easy to do in the system, and I'll show you that as well. Some of the other information you can see is what's fully depreciated, so it may help with budget planning. You can also get a quick 5-year acquisition view of what you purchased over the past 5 years, and you can even see a quick depreciation comparison by book. So let's say you do have to make that mid-quarter convention switch. You'd simply go up here to depreciation, select the maker's convention switch, and simply move it from half year to your mid-quarter for the applicable tax book and the asset placed in service year. So this is after your year end, you're closing out the books and you realize you need to make that change. You'd simply put in your previous fiscal, or if it's happening in your current fiscal, you would certainly select that, and you're done. So quite easy to do. One of the other mass changes that you can make is you can also make a change to your 168 allowance. So if for whatever reason you need to make that change at an individual asset level, all of your assets or even a group of assets that you created, you're able to do that as well en masse. Same rules apply, assets placed in service year and which book you want that to apply to. So it's quite a flexible system and gives you quite a bit of control, and you can set restrictions as to who can take those actions, and you can also control who can set or clear period closes. So one of the other things you can do, let's say an asset's been placed in service for some time, and for whatever reason you need to go back and make some type of change that's going to affect depreciation, so to any of the critical depreciation fields. You can actually go in, let's say I'm going to revise this acquisition value. I can actually enter the new value, but the system is going to ask me, okay, you're making a critical depreciation change. How do you want to handle this? So you'll have the ability to decide, hey, do I want to make this effective from my current depreciation through date? Do I want to go back to my last period closes if I was doing period closes in this particular company? Do you want to go back to the place in service date, which is going to wipe out all depreciation since place in service and recalculate based on new value? So in the case, let's say I decide I'm going to do this from my current through date, I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And if you notice, it's now populated the beginning date. It has calculated what the beginning of year date should be at that point. And it's also calculated the beginning of cum relative to that information. So if I go ahead and save it, okay, it is now going to make that a permanent change. Now, it does keep a great audit trail on that, because one of the things you may need to be able to see is look at this information and see what was changed. So I can go in here and take a look, and it's going to show that the depreciation amount was recalculated here. Okay. I can also see that the information for the acquired value field was changed from 1250 to 1700 for the tax book. So you can actually see that information that had been changed. Okay. It'll also show you that the year-to-date information was changed, the beginning year-to-date, as well as the beginning accum info. And the begin date was set for 10/31. So it does keep a great audit trail of all that information, which is going to be very helpful if you're going through an audit at year end, or you just want to be able to review all of those types of changes. And there are utility reports, so you can actually run reports and what has changed on assets. Okay, so, all right. Next thing I want to do is actually jump into the report section and just give a quick overview of some of the reports that you can see. So what I'm going to do really quickly here is actually go ahead and run depreciation. I'm just going to do it for all my active assets, and I'm going to simulate basically a 1 month run. So I'm going to run depreciation for September, and then I'm going to rerun it for October, so that my depreciation this run is going to be 1 month of depreciation, which is typically how most people are doing it, so that when you're doing your journal entry, it's a monthly journal entry. And I'm actually going to have it run the depreciation expense this time, so we can take a quick look at that information. And now, bear in mind, as I stated, all of these reports, when you run them, are exportable in a variety of formats. So those of you that are familiar with Crystal reports, you can export it to Crystal. You can export it to Excel if you need to do some further manipulation, or out to a PDF file. Okay, so this is my standard depreciation expense, completely unsorted, but you can sort and subtotal this in a variety of ways. If you notice, my prior through date is September, this one is October. So all of the data in my depreciation, this one column, is actually reflecting 1 month of depreciation. And of course, all of your totals are on the back end of this, and you can export, as I stated, all of these reports in all of these formats. Now, you have some more flexibility if you actually go ahead and go straight into the main reports tab, where you can actually look at all of the available reports. And these are a combination of standard and custom reports that I created. So for example, if I wanted to make some changes to my depreciation expense report, the one I just showed you, let's say I don't want to run it just straight system number 1 to the end. I can choose to do subtotals or leave it in full detail. And of course, I can run it based on different dates that I choose to. Now, if I want to change the sort order, which this goes back to those fields we talked about customizing, I may want to be able to run a report like this and sort and subtotal it, let's say by location, and subtotal it, and maybe below that, I can do it by asset class or by GL asset account, for example, and run that same report in this manner. And you'll see it's going to be a significant difference in the layout of this. Now, some of these reports, as I stated, you can export them out. So here, for example, I'm going to show this while it's running that report in the background. I've exported out some of these to Excel. I've exported some of these out to Crystal reports. So you do have some options in how you do it. So for example, if you want to do some really advanced modification to an existing report, you can export it out. You'll have access to all of the fields in the database. You can do a variety of things and create any kind of custom report or custom version of this out in Crystal, or you can certainly export it out to Excel and do some further modification. So here is that same report that I ran previously, just system number 1 to the end, but now I've sorted and subtotaled it by location, and then below that by GL asset account. So you may have different departments or divisions. So there are a variety of different ways you may want to customize this. And of course, any of these changes you do, you can actually save it as a custom report. So if I want to create different versions of the different sort orders, I can actually go ahead and say, hey, let me save this as a custom report. So all of these that are in yellow, you've noticed I've changed something in the name that might reflect how it's sorted. and you can create many versions of this. Now, you can go beyond just changing the sort order. If, for example, you need to be able to remove any columns of data or add any additional columns of data, you can actually do that as well and save that as a custom report, as I've done with some of these. Okay. Now, with some of these other reports are going to be important, especially if you're dealing with the tax side of the house. So, for example, even if you're using an external tax provider to file your taxes for you, you can actually generate your own 4562. So let me run this and show you what that looks like. It'll generate any worksheets needed with it as well. So you can simply run this report. It's an actual fileable IRS form, both pages. And you can simply export this out to a PDF and send it off to your tax provider. And you will have end up saving some billable hours, because they typically are charging you by the amount of time it takes for them to actually do your taxes. You can also generate your own 4797 data as well. So this is your 4797 worksheet, which you can also send off to them so that they can complete that particular form. And this will include both pages, all of the data needed. And there are quite a few good tax reports that you can run tax expense and so on. Now, one of the other reports you'll probably want to run at year end is going to be your disposal report. Now, both your disposal and transfer report will be based on a date range, and you can choose which books you want it to run on. You may want to change the sort order so you're reflecting various departments or divisions separately. You can certainly do that. And just to give you an idea of the information in this, I'm just going to go ahead and run this completely unsorted so that you can actually get a quick snapshot of what this looks like. So if you take a look at the columns of data here, what all of the information is captured in your disposals, and of course your realized gain loss on the far right, as well as this information here that shows your recognized or not recognized portions. So you can certainly choose what date range you want to do this, but this is typically one of the ones most people will run at year end. If you want to see things like current year additions, that's actually going to be in the annual activity report. I'll just go ahead and run that one as well. And there's quite a few, as I stated, reports are standard. Most people find that they can get, 99.99% of the information they need in the system. But for those of you that want to do some advanced reporting or possibly consolidated reporting across multiple companies with different samples of information, you can certainly do that out in Crystal Reports as well. So if you notice here, my annual activity, information that's contained, my current year transfers into out, current year dispositions, and in cost, and all of the totals, of course, are going to be on your last page here. There's also reports you can generate for roll forward information, and a variety of really good standard reports that you may need for the general ledger side as well as for your tax book side. Now let's talk about the general ledger report a bit. So for those of you that are currently using Sage 100 or Sage 300, so if I ran my general ledger report, for example, in the system here, it's my current true date. And this report is actually neat, so if you do want to run it manually, you can certainly do that. You can actually drill down if you want to see, for example, the details of what's generating any of these debits or credits for a particular account. You can actually drill down and see the details. If you're not currently using one of our ERP solutions and you need to be able to export this out to a CSV or Excel file, you can certainly do that and then import it into your accounting software. But for those of you who are currently using Sage 100 or Sage 300, you can actually set up the integration between the two products so that you simply send it over. In the case of Sage 100, Sage 100 will actually pull the data from our depreciation module once the two sides have been configured. So if you notice here, when I selected it, to say, hey, you actually don't need to run this, you can actually retrieve the information from inside of Sage 100. So you don't even have to send it over. In the case of Sage 300, depending on the version you're using, in particular if you're using Sage 300 Construction, it actually is going to do it slightly differently. What it's going to do is you're going to specify your posting date, your journal entry date, and provide a path to the location of your folder that your Sage 300 Construction will have access to, and it's going to format the data for Sage 300, and Sage 300 would then be able to retrieve the file from that location. So ensure that's a shared file. Just want to be able to point that out as well. So you do have quite a bit of flexibility in how you get this information over. And remember, for those of you that are on Sage 100, you're looking at being able to create assets from your invoices, from your AP or PO side. You can actually tell it to apply a template and create the asset at the same time you're doing that PO. Same thing with Sage 300 Standard, Advanced, or Premium. With Sage 300 Construction, you are able to actually send your journal entry over, but it does not have that same ability that the other version of 300 has, where you can do your asset creation from that side of it as well. Okay. So that is our brief overview, just a quick high level of some of the functionality of our fixed assets depreciation module. And as I stated earlier, this is using the same database that our tracking module also uses. And there's integration between our planning module for CIP. So this fixed asset solution is a complete life cycle fixed asset solution, encompassing from CIP to place in service, to tracking, inventory, and reconciliation. All pieces of your asset management can be handled within this solution. In future webinars, we will be able to focus on some of the other modules, but for today's purposes, we just wanted to give you a really good look at the depreciation module and hope this piques your interest and answers some of the questions about asset management, as to how this can play in your current environment, and especially if you're a current Sage 100 or 300 customer, this will be an important addition to your tools for being able to have a smooth workflow in your accounting departments. And with that, I'm going to turn back to Steve to see if there are any questions in the chat that we can answer.
Thank you, Wayne. Right now, I'm not seeing any questions. Has anybody thought of any questions? If you would look at your screen and type them in, I'll be happy to pass them along to Wayne. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody asking any questions at this point. I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance, and I'd like to thank Wayne for taking his time to go through this with us. I hope everybody found it to be informative. And having worked with this, with FAS for a number of years myself, I actually learned a few new things too. Hold on, we just got one question. Looks like, of course, it'd be hard to read. If you make changes such as adjustments, how do you get the information needed to update the GL?
Okay, that's a good question. So any of the ones you saw that I made these changes to earlier, and I don't remember exactly which one I was in, but any of these that I may have made a change, any kind of adjustments here to my acquisition value or whatever it may be, the next time I run my depreciation, you will actually see it'll take it out, because if you notice when I made that change, it took away the prior through date. So when I run my depreciation next and do your next journal entry, or any changes you made since the last run is going to be picked up. So if you made an adjustment to your depreciation or acquisition value, anything that affects depreciation, it will pick that information up. I do want to add one note though. Let's say if you are using period closes when you do this, and let's say it's a change that you want to push back to place in service date or to a date prior to a journal entry that you've made, you'll want to keep in mind that if you did some change that's going to impact that journal entry or period close, you're going to need to clear that period close and rerun your journal entry for that period if you did it on the other side of a journal entry, so that your accounting side in stage 100 or 300 will match that data. If it's in your current month, you haven't run your month-end run yet, then you're fine. But if it affects a prior month that you've already posted, you will definitely need to make sure that you rerun that journal entry so that you update both sides of the equation. Okay.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Wayne, and thank you for attending our webinar. We appreciate everybody coming in and spending our lunch hour with us. We're going to hold another one in December, going over year-end procedures and payroll information. So keep an eye out for that email coming out. In the meantime, thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.